Are you tired of trying, bro? Are you tired of deers running in front of your car as you're out hunting? Did that deer smash up your car's 2 pieces? Are you tired of the woods and the wildlife ruining your cars and belongings? Here at Robert, Jill, and Associates, we will help you soothe those wildlife animals and that wildlife park. Just call us at Robert, Jill, and Associates. We're here for you and your beloved. Welcome back, ladies and gents. It's the Smarmy Grin podcast, episode number 11, September 27th, 2017. Tonight's podcast is brought to you by Robert, Jill, and Associates. Just want to thank our sponsors for tonight's episode. On tonight's podcast, I want to talk about Florida Talk Radio. Yes, Florida Talk Radio. Just want to give you some personal reflections on what I remember as far as growing up here in Florida and listening to talk radio. And certain things that happened in my life along the way. And how much I love listening to Florida Talk Radio. Not as good as it used to be, but it's still good. That's going to take care basically most of the show. Let me talk about that. And on the vent segment, the bitching, the moaning, the vent, I want to speak about sprinklers. Yes, sprinklers. I had an experience or issue, whatever you may want to call it. I call it an issue, an ongoing issue, annoying issue. Thanks, local government and city workers. So I'll get more in depth about that later on in the show. I'm going to keep this short tonight, about half an hour, maybe less. My voice is starting to go. I am a little bit under the weather. Not really. I just had a cup of wine. So my voice is starting to fade, and I'm starting to fade as well. So welcome to the episode number 11, Smarmy Grin podcast. A very beautiful Wednesday night. Crescent moon's out. I was just in the pool, chilling, relaxing. So nice. Having a cup of wine, listening to some podcasts that I like to listen to. The Bill Burr podcast is a really good one. I enjoy that podcast, and the Jim Cornette podcast is very entertaining as well. And also the Jesse Ventura podcast. I've been listening to those for the last 4 years now. But on tonight's first segment, I'm going to have 2 segments, like I said earlier, just this one and the vent. But on tonight's first segment, I want to talk about Florida Talk Radio. So as you guys might know, from what I've said before, I grew up here in Central Florida, been here most of my life. Since I was like 9 years old. So I've listened to just about any radio station and format that you can think of. And the reason why I want to talk about this, it's because I found out a few months ago that one of our local talk show hosts, he has a talk show host on the FM on 104.1. And he's been doing talk radio in Central Florida for the last, I want to say, over 30 years. He first started out in the AM and then went to FM on 104.1. He's been doing the same show for the last, I believe, like 25, 26 years. That's when I first started listening to that radio station and his talk show. And quite honestly, the only reason why I listened to that radio station is because of him. And the man I'm talking about is Jim Phillips. So I found out a couple of months ago that he was retiring. And it's a bummer. It's a bummer for me because I absolutely love that show. Been listening to that show since it was first air on 104.1. I absolutely love that show. To me, he's definitely up there as I would have to say, my personal opinion, he's the best broadcaster that has ever lived. His shows are always funny. The way that I like to compare his shows to Jerry Seinfeld, which his shows are basically about nothing. They can go from like talking to a toaster to talking politics in like 1 minute and still be entertainment, be entertaining. And that's why I absolutely love that show. But before he came to the FM, I first started listening to talk radio when the Ron and Ron show when I first heard of the Ron and Ron show, which was in one of the local Rock 100 stations, DIZ, from back in the day. If you live in Central Florida, you guys remember that station, WDIZ. And the Ron and Ron show, in my opinion, is like the funniest radio show that's ever been here, that's ever aired here in Central Florida and in Florida. Better than Howard Stern. All the stuff that they were doing was so funny. And I still own a lot of those VHS tapes that they had up for sale 20 plus years ago. But those are the guys that I was listening to when I was a kid. The Ron and Ron show consisted of Ron and Ron, Flipper, Fezzy, one of my old-time favorite characters, Fez Whatley. He was so funny. He's still funny. So Flipper, Fezzy, Paulo, and a couple of other characters. And I just absolutely fell in love with that show. I was in middle school when I first started listening to that show. And when I graduated, I was still listening to. When I graduated high school, I was still listening to that show. And I listened to up until like 3 years after high school, maybe 4 years after high school. And after that, they disbanded. But that show to me was the best, the funniest show in Florida. So just from listening to them and getting that kind of entertainment every morning, it just made me want to get into broadcasting. I'm sure it made me want to get into broadcasting. I'm sure it had the same effect on other people here in Florida. But there's never going to be another show like that. They were so funny and entertaining in the morning. It was hilarious listening to them. These guys were into wrestling and rock and all this stuff that was happening in the late 80s, early 90s. Especially when the grunge scene came out and they were playing all the grunge music, Nirvana and bands like that, Candlebox, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, all the stuff that I grew up listening to, they were into as well. So when you're a kid and when you're in high school, that's you're very impressionable, and it definitely made an impression on me. To a point where I was going to every single live show and I was skipping a lot of classes. So my buddies and I would skip classes to go to their live shows. And this was like Florida, late 80s, early 90s. Still, party state Florida. And you would go to all these shows and you were a teenager. And a lot of the times, of course, you were underage. But you still get in. And the adults treated you well. And even though I was in high school and my buddies were in high school, all the adults were always really cool to us, So it was so much fun skipping school just to go see their events live and all that. When they came here to Central Florida, because this show was based out of Tampa, so when they came here closer to Orlando, we would skip school and go see them. And I remember one time Flipper had a band called the DGTs, and that's the acronym of the name was the Dead German Tourist, because at that point there was an epidemic of dead German tourists around here. A lot of people were being murdered because they would either get lost around the city and go to the bad places around the city. And that's the reason why the state of Florida had the rental car places not place any kind of ads on their rental cars. Because if you remember, I'm in my early 40s, so if you're like around in mid 30s, early 40s, you would probably remember that back in the day, especially the 80s and 90s, I would say up until like mid 90s, a lot of the rental car places would have, regardless of the name of that rental car, it would have a sticker of the name of the rental car of the company, and it was also on the plate. So that right there, you were already a target for people that were looking to commit a crime on tourists. So that's when the state came out with, hey, we need to stop this. We need to keep our tourists safe, because that's big money. So that's when they implemented that. I don't know if it became a law or not, but the state basically told the rental car companies, and the rental car companies told the state, we can't do this anymore, so we're not going to put up our names on the cars and on the plates either. So the name of the rental companies are not going to be anywhere to be found on the exterior of the car. So Flipper from the Ron and Ron show, they named their band the DGTs. It's messed up. They had a live concert out on East Colonial at the 7-Eleven on Econo-Lakahatchee, which was down actually about a quarter mile north of Valencia College, community college back at the time. So I skipped school, I skipped high school, went to see them, to see their band live at the at the parking lot of the 7-Eleven. And I was so happy when I got there, because I wasn't the only kid that was skipping school. So but it was so awesome. I still remember that as if it was yesterday. I had such a good time seeing those guys live. It was a free concert, man. It was a parking lot concert at 7-Eleven. Can't get any better than that, So, but the Ron and Ron show definitely was one of my favorite shows growing up. Until this day, there's a lot of material on YouTube that you guys can find. And you can find also on Ron and Fezzy, because they did their own thing afterwards. And Ron Bennington and Fez Watley. So those two guys are so funny, and I think Ron Bennington is probably one of the funniest human beings on the planet, and he doesn't get a lot of credit for having that talent or being that talented as far as being quick-witted and funny, and Fez Watley is the same way. And to me, I always thought that Ronnie Diaz, when he was with the Ron and Ron show, he was the one that kept that show moving. He was the motor behind that show, and it kept everything smooth. And it just kept that show a fine-tuned show. So I miss him too. So I there's nothing but love for all those three guys and the Ron and Ron show. So thanks, Ronnie B, Ronnie D, and Fezzy. Thanks, guys. So from there, though, when I started listening to the Ron and Ron show, I found Jim Phillips on 104.1. Finally. Here in Central Florida, we got an FM talk, nothing but talk channel. Most of those FM talk channels were on AM back in those days, and it was nothing but either politics or sports. So when you had that option of nothing but talk radio, and with different personalities, in different type of shows, you get hooked on that too, because it was fresh and it was new. It was on the FM. So I got hooked on Jim Phillips. I got hooked on Jim Phillips from the beginning. Absolutely loved this show from the beginning. Like I said before, his show has always been a show about nothing, just like the Seinfeld show, where they could be talking, like I said, they could be talking about a toaster. And then before you know it, they're talking about some gourmet cuisine that they made the night before and how they made it and what ingredients they used. And from there, they'll go to a little bit on politics, on entertainment. But it's never too serious. It's always lighthearted and funny. And it's always been like that. And when you listen to his show, and I'm speaking about back in those days and even nowadays, his newer shows, when you listen to his shows, from the very first hour, from 3 o'clock to the very last hour, 7 o'clock, it is the most entertaining hours of any talk radio that's out there, or talk radio show. And he's another guy that doesn't get a lot of credit as being the innovator of talk radio in Central Florida. A lot of people call him the godfather of radio, and I completely agree. He really is the godfather of talk radio in Central Florida. And I'm going to miss him dearly. I almost lost 2 jobs because of his show. One of the jobs that I had, I was working in the downtown Orlando area in one of the buildings there, and I was, doing maintenance on one of the bigger buildings. This was like right after high school, or actually it was before I graduated. So, they were like, listen, the school was like, since you get off at 12 from school, you can pick a trade or get a part-time job. And I should have picked the trade, dummy me, but I ended up picking up a part-time job, and that part-time job was doing maintenance around one of the big buildings in downtown Orlando. So I always, when I went to work there, I always had my Walkman on. Yes, I said Walkman. So I always had my Walkman on, and whatever I was doing, I was always listening either to the Ron and Ron show, or I was listening to Jim Phillips, and in between, I was listening to our local rock station with Taco Bob and Pat Lynch on 101.1 WJRR. So it was either those three stations throughout the day. So one afternoon, my bosses, they were like, listen, you did all your work. The next, I had like half an hour left, so like, you can just hang out or whatever. And so I was like, all right, no problem, no big deal. So I was looking for something to do, and I pretty much had everything done. So I had half an hour left on my shift, so I went up to the very top floor of that building. And the very top floor was the floor that they kept all the stock, as far as like drinks and stuff like that, or like, I would say like catering stuff. So that's where they left all that stock up there. All that catering stock was up there. So I used to go up there and clean up during my shift, but this was like the last half hour of my shift. So I went up there and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go up there and chill and just get a panoramic view of Orlando. And as I'm listening to Jim Phillips, so I went up there, and there was a little cubby hole basically underneath the sink, and I just wanted to chill. So I went under that little cubby hole, and I was listening to Jim Phillips. And after 10 minutes, lo and behold, I looked to my left, and I see my boss and his son. I was like, oh my God, I'm fired. So my boss looks at me and he gives me this hey slick kind of look, like, what are you doing here, slick? And I'm giving him this look like, oh shoot, I'm busted. So I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm not gonna have a job tomorrow. So his son was there, and his son is looking at me, I'm looking at him, and his son he's busting out laughing because he's my age, and he's probably thinking, if I was that kid, I'd be doing the same thing too. So the two of them are just looking at me, and my boss gives me this look like, oh, come on, man, you can do better than this. So I was, the look that I gave him was like, you got me, slick. So anyways, he leaves, he takes his son, and they leave, and I'm sitting there like, oh shoot, I'm not gonna have a job tomorrow. And this whole time I'm thinking, man, like, I came up here so I can get away from people and listen to Jim Phillips. So I can listen to his show for that last half hour of my shift. And no, I did not get fired. I almost got fired. I was really worried. But either way, I ended up quitting the job. It wasn't for me. I didn't really like the job. So a couple of weeks later, I ended up quitting, just leaving. Wink, wink. And so that was the one time that I almost got fired because I was listening to Jim Phillips. But that was my relationship with the show. It didn't matter. Not just the Jim Phillips show, but with the Ron and Ron show as well. It didn't matter what I was doing. I was always hooked listening to these guys. And it never prevented me from doing my job at work, except for that last half hour. But it never prevented me from doing a good job at work and from doing my job at work. So I was always hooked with these two shows. And, come to find out that Jim Phillips is going to retire, it kind of, I was thinking about that today, and this is why I wanted to talk about it today. I'm just like, wow, like this, he's going to leave a big void in talk radio here in Central Florida. He really is. I don't see who else is going to take his spot and who else is going to do a better job than he. So I'm hoping that they'll get someone that's going to be as entertaining as Jim Phillips. But the show to me means a lot because I grew up with that show. And if you ever listen to his show, he's always giving you advice. Not just life advice, but advice on certain situations that come up in life. And I've always taken his advice, even though it was over the radio. I've always taken his advice, and the advice that I took from him just by listening to his show, a lot of that stuff worked out. So there's a personal relationship that you have with these talk shows, radio talk shows. And that's part of radio, that's the part of the entertainment aspect of it that some people don't understand, others do. But it's a personal experience with a listener, as far as, that's how I can put it. That's how it's been for me. It's always been a personal experience with Jim Phillips on a personal level, because I was a kid when I started watching his show. I was like, I want to say I was probably like 14, 15 when I started listening to his show. So I was a kid, and a kid who grew up with a single parent, a mom, not having a dad, and then you hear a guy like Jim Phillips over the radio, and he makes a lot of sense, and a lot of the advice that he gives you is really good life advice. So it's always been to me, and it's going to sound kind of, I don't know how it's going to sound, but it's always been to me like a fatherly figure type of radio talk show. That's what it's always been like to me. So it's always been like that fatherly figure over the radio, giving you advice and telling you, hey man, you should do this, you should do that, or you should try this place, you should try this kind of food, or you should try this and try that. And I've always taken those advice and never left me astray, and never done anything wrong because of his advice. But I've always respected the man in the show for being so entertaining, and he doesn't get a lot of credit also for being one of those guys that's always involved in charities around town and helping out different charitable causes and all that. And throughout all these years, when we had 9/11, we had Charlie, when we had the Pulse shootings, with just Hurricane Irma and other things like that, he's always been one of those guys on the radio, just, keeping you informed and keeping you calm through tough situations. And I'll never forget his show after President Trump got elected. There was a lot of people freaking out. And he came out on the radio and he said, we will survive this. Our republic will survive this. Calm down, people. Just calm down. So this is the type of guy that I'm talking about. He's the type of person that goes out there and tells you, you guys just need to relax and go on with your day, basically. So, a lot of people needed to hear that because a lot of people were getting freaked out. So, but he's always been that guy. That's the guy that I want to listen to when something of like the something of 9/11 nature happens, or something like the Pulse shooting happens, you want to hear that calming voice. So I'm definitely going to miss him as much as I missed Ron and Ron over the years. And thank God for YouTube. So thanks, YouTube. First of all, thanks, YouTube, for giving me this outlet and let me make my podcast and putting it out on YouTube. And but yeah, thanks, YouTube. So thank you, YouTube, and it's definitely gonna miss Jim Phillips. So if I ever need to listen to anything, I hope that some of his shows are gonna be on YouTube. But those two guys, Ron and Ron, and Jim Phillips, and another guy that doesn't get a lot of credit as well. One show that I absolutely loved on the 104.1, and that was SBK. Wishing you the best, SBK. We all love you. I'm a huge fan of yours, and I miss your show, man. I hope that you can get back and making those podcasts, because your podcast show was definitely my favorite podcast. And the radio station that you were working for, I have to say, they're the equivalent of the Magic Organization, which sometimes you scratch your head and you're like, why did they make that move? And when they got rid of your show, and I still think till this day, and I thought that day was one of the biggest mistakes they ever made, because your show was unique, and I absolutely loved your show. You, Matt, and Angel. That show meant so much to me because I got so much entertainment from that show. And when I was towards the end of your show, before your show was canceled, I was going through my personal situation with mom, who passed away right around that time. And you guys kept me, just sane, really. And the entertainment value that you SBK, and the SBK show and the Jim Phillips brought to my life in that period of time was something that I needed. So your shows mean a lot to the public because it's an escape for all of us, especially when you're going through a tough situation and personal losses. And that's the personal part of radio that I absolutely love. And I hope that my podcast can do that for some people someday. And I hope that some people will listen to this and get some entertainment out of it while they're going through a difficult time. So maybe for like half an hour or 45 minutes, I can keep you guys entertained in some way and clear your mind from whatever personal issues you're going through. Because in life, we all need that. We need that escape, either through TV, through sports, through athletics, through the radio. And for me, it's always been about radio. I've always been in love with radio. I've always been in love with the format and talk radio, especially talk radio. So it's always been an escape for me since I was a kid. And having all these shows, all these 3 shows in my life, I feel as if it's been a blessing. So from Ron and Ron to Jim Phillips and to the SBK show, you guys have been a blessing on my life. And from one guy who does a podcast now, not well done, but from one guy to all of you guys, I just wanted to say thank you for always bringing me that entertainment aspect of it and keeping my head up during the tough times. So I'll end. That's all I'll say about that. And on my next segment, which I call the vent, the bitching, the moaning. This is what I call the vent. So, what I want to vent about tonight is the local city workers here who go around and mow everybody's lawn. The part of the lawn that's closer to the street, that's the part of the lawn that they mow. So yesterday afternoon, I get home from work and I see all these like plastic pieces all over my front yard. This debris all over my front yard. And I'm like, oh my God, what is it now? So I get out of my car. I get closer to the debris area, if you want to call it ground zero. And lo and behold, it looked like my sprinkler exploded. And I already knew what happened. This is the same feeling that I got when I first saw this, which I was kind of freaked out because I was like, man, I hope that none of the local hardware stores are selling exploding sprinklers. That's what I thought, man, after the second one. And this one that I found yesterday was the fourth one. So I put 2 and 2 together, which equals 4, after the third one. And I was like, you know, it's not a defect with the product, because the product is a solid product. It's the people that are mowing the lawn closer to the street. The city workers. These dudes, they don't care, man. They mow the lawn too low. So after they mow my damn lawn, 2-3 days later, it's already dried up. And it really ticks me off because it takes a long time for the lawn to come back. I mean, not a long time, but a couple of weeks after watering it a certain amount of days during the week. But it's just infuriating because, you know, I'm extremely anal about my lawn. I like keeping a nice lawn, and I like my lawn kept green and nicely mowed. And when I see this crap, which they go around and mow once a month, and when I see this, it just really ticks me off, man. So I got home from work, and of course they ran over another sprinkler, and I'm really ticked because this is the fourth one, and each sprinkler is $8, so it's now up to $32. And for a lot of you, you're probably like, it's only $32, it's not that much money. But for me, it is a lot of money, because I could be spending this money on something else. I could be spending this money on my Fire Stick that I really want, or another Roku that I really want, or a night out at the pub or one of the local breweries. You know, I'd rather spend my money that way than on a sprinkler. But you have to do what you gotta do, right? So this is already $34. So I was extremely upset, not only because of that, but also that I wasted, when I first started replacing all these old sprinklers after I bought my house, I wasted $130 on sprinklers that were absolute crap. And those sprinklers, and I'm going to call them out, the K12 sprinklers and the Rainbird sprinklers, in my personal opinion, are the crappiest sprinklers that you can buy. There's too much going on with these sprinklers. After a month of having them, this has been my experience with all the ones that I bought. After a month after having them or installing them, they're always leaking at the top, right at the turret. And I'm not talking about a little leak, a massive leak. You can never adjust them right. That's one of the biggest issues that I have with those things. You can never adjust them right. They're heavy and bulky, so chances are after a certain amount of time, they're going to put all that weight on your PCV elbow, and that at some point is going to come off or break. So I'm not a fan of these things. So I ended up buying, not knowing this, that they had all these issues. I ended up buying like, 12 of them. So I probably spent right around like almost $140, because they're like 10, they're like 9 something, $10 a piece each, right? So after the 12th one that I bought, I should have never done that. I should have known, but I'm a little dumb. It takes me a while, you know, to figure things out. So I started buying the Orbits. And I have to say, thank you, Orbits. God bless you and your company and for your sprinkler design. What a simple install with these sprinklers. You install them, it's quick and easy. Adjusting the turret, adjusting the stream, the spray pattern is so easy. Adjusting all those, the spray pattern, the just everything on these sprinklers are so simple. Especially the spray pattern, man. That's the simplest thing that I've ever seen in any sprinkler. And the stream, the spray stream, how far is it going to spray? That's so simple too. The turret is probably one of the simplest things that I've ever had to adjust. And it's always, honestly, it's always a pleasure installing these sprinklers. I absolutely love these sprinklers. So thanks, Orbits, for such a great product. And my recommendation to you guys is, if you're going to buy a sprinkler, buy Orbits. You cannot go wrong with Orbits. You're not going to regret it. So if you're looking for an impact sprinkler, buy an Orbit sprinkler. So that's what I had to deal with. I had to replace the sprinkler yesterday, yet again, because these fools that work for the city, they ran over my sprinkler and they chewed up and butchered my lawn again. Thank you, local government. So it's frustrating because you just want to come home and relax and not replace sprinklers. But I ended up doing that tonight. Went to Home Depot, bought a couple, actually I bought 3 Orbits. I ended up replacing 2 sprinklers, one of my old K12s. And by the way, those K12s that I bought in Rainbirds, I still got them. They still, some of them work well, other ones don't. But I've had such a bad experience with these sprinklers that I'm just like, you know what, I don't even want to use them. So that was the last one of those that I had to replace. And I have them in my shed, and I'll just leave them there for emergencies like what I had the other day. But anyways, so I went to Home Depot, bought them, came back home, and I kid you not, it took me like half an hour to replace these things. 15 and 15 total with adjusting and everything. Done. Bam. Done, done, done. Thank God. Thank God. Because if it was those other sprinklers that I was just talking about, it would take me 2 hours, and that's not a lie. So I was so happy that it only took half an hour. So I was just I'm upset at the city, so I'm gonna have to buy a sign that says, "Hey, please do not mow my lawn. Do not mow this portion of the lawn. I'll do it," which I have been since I've been living in this house, since I bought my house. So please do not mow my lawn. So that's what I wanted to vent about. Vent about that. Please don't mow my lawn. I'd rather do it myself. There's a certain way that I like to mow my lawn. So that's what I wanted to vent about the city workers here. And these guys are professionals. I don't know how you can be a professional and cut a lawn that low and butcher sprinklers right along the way. I mean, come on. It doesn't take a genius to push a lawnmower or to adjust a lawnmower, but apparently it does. What the hell do I know? But anyways, that's what after all that, what I love to do to relax and calm down is to get in my pool, drink a beer or a glass of wine, and just basically wind down, no pun intended, and just chill for the rest of the night. But anyways, that's what I wanted to vent about. Now I feel better. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to me vent tonight on the Smarmy Grin podcast, episode number 11. So I'm keeping this short, and I'll be saying goodbye. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you guys have an awesome, awesome night. And man, this wine is kicking in, so I gotta go, man. I gotta go get some sleep. Anyways, you guys have a fantastic night and a fantastic week, and I'll be listening to you next time on episode number 12 on the Smarmy Grin podcast. Have an awesome night. See ya!